He's a lo-fi horror guy. Yeah, he's kind of a guy, but he is so lo-fi a horror guy. Yeah. Lo-fi horror guy has been recorded in front of a live studio audience.
What is typically I ask about your horror origin story, but we're talking Planet Wax today here. So give me a little bit on your sci-fi origin story as well.
Well, I think that like the thing is as a kid, and people will always ask this question, like, so how did you become a horror fan, or how did you become a sci-fi fan? And personally, I don't believe there's any real science behind it. I just think that a lot of people are just, some people are just attracted to it, and I'm not exactly sure why. The same way that some people are attracted to, whatever, skateboarding or playing tennis or whatever. People just kind of like what they like. But as a kid, I was definitely always attracted to anything that was kind of weird and out there. Books on ghosts and the supernatural, books on, cryptozoology, monsters and stuff like that. And definitely, like aliens and UFOs. And I remember getting, books from the library as a kid on it and reading about movies like, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I'd never heard of before. So I kind of became a sci-fi fan before I was a horror fan. And I think a lot of that's just because of the fact that I was probably too scared to watch horror movies when I was a kid.
Okay.
They really scared me. I mean, I remember my mom renting Poltergeist, and I made it through about the first 10 minutes of it or something like that. It scared me so bad. So for me, sci-fi was kind of like, my first introduction to the weird and the unusual. And then with fantasy stuff, definitely I was into that, like the sword and sorcery or the sword and sandals movies like Conan and everything. In the 80s, I was like a lot of nerdy kids. I played Dungeons and Dragons and everything like that. So I was
Sure.
into all of that stuff. Now, definitely, though, I would definitely describe myself more as a horror fan than a sci-fi fan. In terms of later in life, horror just became. I'm like you know what I mean? Like I'm looking behind you and I'm seeing all your VCDs or no, what were they called? CEDs.
CEDs, yeah, yeah.
I have that same Friday the 13th CED signed by Savini, and I've got all that stuff in my house and everything.
Oh
And it's
shit.
sort of all consuming. So for me, Blood on Black Wax was really the passion project that I really wanted to get done, and because it did well and it was successful. Sorry, I just spilled something on the book. Because and it did well. Jeff was sort of like, we got to do a sequel. We got to do a sequel, and he really wanted to do a sci-fi book because I think he's really passionate about a lot of stuff like Star Wars and especially Doctor Who and everything like that. So that was sort of an
Yeah.
opportunity to get into that. And Blood on Black Wax was something that like I could sit down and whip out 500 words on a soundtrack in like 30 minutes kind of thing because I'm just so passionate about it. Uh, Planet Wax, I had some of that when I was writing about Robocop and Conan, and then some of it was a challenge, and I kind of had to work outside my comfort zone a little bit when I was writing about, Batteries Not Included, and like these films that I hadn't watched since the 80s and everything. But it was really
Right.
fun because it gave me an opportunity to kind of look at those movies in a different way. And when you really study the soundtrack and the score behind films, you get a real sense of what was the sort of art, what was the sort of aesthetic that they were trying to push through to make this movie what it was, kind of thing.
Okay, okay. Now, when you guys, the early stages of you guys talking about this, and then you had the opportunity, I mean, with your music background, with, Rue Morgue and such, and that being, a big interest in your likes. What was it about the Invaders from Mars that you wanted to, that ultimately was the choice for the go-to for the 7-inch to be included?
Yeah, we struggled a little bit with coming up with the right soundtrack for this book, and I think that a lot of that's because obviously there's been a huge. I'm not even going to call it trend. It's actually a market of reissuing horror soundtracks, right? Waxwork and Death Waltz and all those companies that just. And once I think they really started something, like once they started reissuing horror soundtracks, um, it just really lit a fuse, and it was just like horror soundtrack after horror soundtrack after horror soundtrack was getting reissued. The challenge with doing sci-fi is that you're dealing with a very different genre where horror is still kind of in the basement. It's still kind of like your ugly cousin or your ugly stepchild kind of thing, and it's always going to be that way. Sci-fi is like sometimes big blockbustery A-list type of films, right? So you're not going to get the right, like, Close Encounters of the Third Kind to reissue something. So we had to kind of look for something that was kind of attainable. And for me, I met Christopher Young through Blood on Black Wax. When we did an interview with him, we talked about Trick or Treat and Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and Hellraiser. And he's a really good guy. Like, I got to give a shout out to Christopher Young because he's an absolute great guy. And he's a legitimate Hollywood player, right? Like I say, he's done stuff like Spider-Man 3 and even like romantic comedies like Sweet November. But he's right down here with a really good dude, right? He's a really good guy. Like, he'll call me up and everything like that just to talk. When you did the Pet Sematary remake, like, I'll text him and say, hey man, I love the score that you did for this, and he'll text me back. So he's a really good guy. So I can't remember exactly what it was we were after, but I know that when we looked at Christopher Young, it kind of came down to 3 different scores. And I may as well just talk about it. I don't think it matters. One was Species, one was The Fly 2, and one was Invaders from Mars. Those are his big sci-fi scores. With Species, we were told that there was another company that wanted to put out the full soundtrack. I don't know who that company is, but that they would look into whether or not we could get the rights to release a 7-inch version of it. And we just thought, I don't want to step on anyone's toes. I don't want to piss off some big label or something like that by jumping the gun and beating them to the punch. So we didn't do that. And then The Fly 2, I kind of liked it because I kind of liked the score for it. And also because everyone loves The Fly, right? The Fly is a huge film. So people love The Fly. They're going to be interested in The Fly too. That being said, I'm not a fan of the film, and so then we looked at Invaders from Mars, and I thought, well, Invaders from Mars is a cool film because the fact that it was also directed by Tobe Hooper, who's for horror directors out there, and that's going to pique the interest of the horror community as well as the sci-fi community. And with Invaders from Mars, there is a cool story behind it, right? Because Christopher Young did this huge experimental score for it. He was still relatively young in his career. And he took the whole musique concrète approach of just being completely experimental and using sounds in a musical capacity when they weren't necessarily intended to be musical. He told me stories about going down, recording subway trains going by and recording the ocean and all this stuff. And the movie studio was not into it. They're like, we want you to just make it. And so placing those to his score with Michael Kors, is that his name? I think Michael Kors, I think is his name. Did a synth score for it. So this was an opportunity. I wanted to do a full length. I would have liked to like sort of give him the opportunity to present his whole vision, but what our experience was with Blood on Black Wax and Prom Night was that it was really difficult to just package, like just the logistics of packaging a 12-inch with Blood on Black Wax was a pain in the neck. And so when we did Prom Night, we thought no one's going to care about the 7-inch. They're going to want the 12-inch. And actually it was kind of the opposite. Everyone wanted that 7-inch. That 7-inch, like, and I sell it to people for, I'm not going to tell you what I sell it to people for, but it's not that much. I could probably sell it for a lot because there's this huge demand for it, and I don't even understand why. So we thought, let's just do a 7-inch for Invaders from Mars. But
what he's talking about, if you're watching, is this bad boy here.
That bad boy. So the art there is by Gary Pullen. I'm sure a lot of you guys know him, and I think that you've featured him before, I believe, haven't you? And Peter, I see Peter Sudal there. I'll give him a shout out. He's a good guy. He's asking about where we can pre-order it. So you can't pre-order right now. The only way to get it is August 29th is going to be the first record store day. There's going to be 3 record store days, and we're on the first one. And the only way to get it is by going to your record store. That being said, I don't know how record store days work this year. Some stores are just going to be open. Some stores you're going to have to pre-order from. Some will do curbside delivery. It's totally up to your own record store day. So it's a bit of an adventure, but hopefully that's going to be kind of fun to try and get it on record store day. And if you can't get it, then you'll be able to pre-order the book, and you may or may not be able to get the 7-inch separately. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, a couple of people have asked too, and I didn't want to put anything out there false. Somebody was just asking. I think earlier Peter was asking when we were getting you reconnected as far as so I didn't know. I thought 1984 was going to be having it on the site, but so it's going to be strictly like record stores. I mean, that's legit. That's awesome. That's what record store day is.
Yeah. This edition will be strictly record store day, but there will be a regular edition that you can get afterwards, kind of thing.
Sure.
And
Okay.
and that's huge for me because I mean I'm a huge vinyl collector. I'm a huge vinyl guy, and I never thought I'd have my own record store day release. So that was big for me.
Yeah, that's a huge accomplishment from music community and horror movies and the likes. It's a big combination, and you're right in the middle of it. So that's awesome. In previous interviews, you've mentioned before that Halloween, the movie Halloween, the '78 original Halloween movie, is the horror theme. What would you say? Maybe before or after your research with Planet Wax, what would you say is the sci-fi theme?
See, that's really okay. I'm going to be honest with you. Planet Wax is a bit of a funny book because the thing with the difference between horror and sci-fi is that when you talk horror, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Plan 9 from Outer Space or you're talking about like Hereditary. It's all horror, right? And if you love a horror movie, you kind of love all horror movies. Like, I'm not saying every horror movie is good, but you're going to be interested in every horror movie. Planet Wax covers a lot of different things that fall under the umbrella of sci-fi and fantasy. So it would be impossible for me to sort of say, like, well, the Robocop theme is the sci-fi theme because Robocop has nothing to do with Star Wars. You know what I mean? So Jeff is probably going to give a very different answer to that question. But for me, I'll give you two. And the first one is Conan the Barbarian, which is fantasy, not sci-fi. But that is an epic score. Like, that is a score that, like, yes, I put the CD in my car and I drive around to it, and I get so fucking pumped when I listen to it. And it's so heroic and epic and awesome. And it's just like it's Basil Pouladaris just wrote the ultimate theme for Conan in that. I just think that it embodies everything about the character and the world that they created in that film. And then the other Basil Pouladaris score that I love, of course, is the one I just mentioned, Robocop, because Robocop is, again, extremely epic. It gets you so pumped, like you want to drive around, and you listen to that score. I don't think there's a better pairing for a montage that I can think of in the musical theme that plays when Robocop first goes out to stop crime in Detroit, where you're based in Detroit, are you not?
I am west of Detroit, but still, Michigan. Yep.
Michigan. But that's just like, it's just such a fucking awesome piece of music. So that for me is like, those are the two that I would pick out of the book as saying, if you're going to only own two soundtracks from the book, get those two, kind of thing. But Jeff will give you a very different answer, I'm sure.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that because it is kind of tough, as far as like, and I think it was the right move for Planet Wax as far as including, the fantasy too, because some of the stuff, it edges on that very thin line, but it is a little bit of a different, subgenre as far as like the fantasy and sci-fi, and I think it's a really nice touch as far as, it all being included in one, and some of the stuff's really, really fun and great interviews. What were some of your favorite interviews for this book?
So this goes against everything that's in my character, but I think that one of my favorite interviews was with Lamal, who did the theme song for The Never-Ending Story. Because like when I talk about writing outside my comfort zone, talking about Lamal and what was his band? I can never say it right. Kaka Juju. I fucked it up. But anyway, his band. And they were actually in the American Horror Story, the 80s American Horror Story
slasher
season. And but anyhow, he was just this funny character, and he had this funny, British accent and all his little Britishisms, and he was very polite. And he got me to sing the song, and he's like, I'm like, dude, I can't sing. And he's like, no, sing it. So I sang it, and he kind of laughed at me, and he's like, you sing that to your girlfriend? I'm like, no, I don't. He just told me the great story about, how he was partying a lot and, like, stayed up all night smoking cigarettes and drinking and everything like that. and that he barely could get up the next day and get the flight to meet up with George Roeder to write the song, and how stressful that was. And he just he was a very polite and very supportive person. Like, you know, he talked about, yeah, you know, make sure that I get a copy of the book. And his publicist did follow up with me some months later and said, oh, by the way, Lamal was asking about when he can get a copy of that book. So I always feel like when they got interviews, they just do it and then they forget about it. But I thought it was pretty cool that he actually remembered the interview and, you know, took an interest in the book and everything like that. So that one definitely stands out to me. The problem with the interviews for this book is that there's a lot of, like, and Jeff will tell you the same thing, that I felt like we were constantly saying three names: John Williams, James Horner, and Jerry Goldsmith. And the problem is that two of those guys are dead, and one of those guys, John Williams, we got somewhere towards getting an interview, but he was just too busy. He was doing the latest Star Wars film, and we couldn't get him. So same thing. Basil Poulidaris, would have loved to interview him, but he's long gone, right?
There's some really, really sweet behind the scenes stuff, some really cool interviews, some absolutely movies that I've forgot about since I was a little kid. And I know one of them in particular was The Secret of Nim. That was something my wife and I were like recently talking about. I'm like, oh my God, it's in this book.
Jeff, so Jeff, as some people will find out, he writes children's books, and he's very involved. He's an elementary school teacher, and he writes children's books. So I think that's a big part of his life. So when we did this book, I think like the idea was to do a purely sci-fi book. I brought in the fantasy part because I thought, well, what I was saying before about the horror soundtrack reissue market, that market doesn't quite exist for sci-fi. Like, people aren't reissuing a lot of sci-fi soundtracks the way they are horror films. There are some, but not as many. And so I was trying to put it together visually, and I know that Matt from 1984 is heavily interested in the visual component of the book. I think that's his main interest, actually. And so I was thinking visually what kind of stands out, and the covers for fantasy movies were always badass, right? It's always some big muscle dude and some babe maiden in her bikini or whatever and slaying a dragon. And then Jeff, I think, was very interested in this sort of like children's fantasy sort of aspect, and I thought that kind of worked because people love nostalgia, and it's always the 80s. It's always people. There was something about the 80s that people really focused in on. Even kids born today, you know, like my girlfriend's daughter, she's 11, and she loves Labyrinth, right? Like, she loves Labyrinth, and she loves you know, Legend and those types of films. That if I was a kid, if I was an 11-year-old, I wouldn't want to watch a 30-year-old movie or a 40-year-old movie, right? But like, these will never die. It was a creative peak. There was something about it. Yeah, Peter Siddall saying Frazetta. Anyone? Yes, Frazetta is God. He's the god of fantasy art for sure.
And I mean, speaking of art, the art that wound up on Planet Wax, Shane Lewis slapped that up on the cover, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Andrew Wright, who's the graphic designer for Rumor, he did Blood on Black Wax. I really actually liked it. I love the cover for Blood on Black Wax, and the color scheme I thought was perfect. And the cover for Planet Wax. So I came up with the title Planet Wax with Matthew. We kind of just, you know, did it the way a lot of people would do things. We threw out a bunch of different titles, and it was always something about a planet or from beyond or something about outer space. And we ended up combining two titles or something like that. And I said Planet Wax because it ties it together with Blood on Black Wax, and also it sounds cool. And also it gives you the impression of, like, you know, we live on Planet Wax. Like, vinyl is fucking huge. And he went with his in-house guy, Shane Lewis, to do the cover. And I think he kind of tied it together with Blood on Black Wax a bit. And again, I love the color scheme. I love the blue and the green. Matthew is definitely the visual guy behind this whole product. He's a project. Sorry, he's very into visuals, and he's got a real knack for design and that type of thing. Even though I don't think he has any background in it, but it's just what he's really into.
Yeah, for sure. All the stuff looks absolutely great. You know, like, I've got a bookshelf over here, and, you know, aside from it being a book and informational and really cool to look at inside, it's one of those things, it's almost like an art piece, kind of like how vinyl has come back around with the cover art, you know, being so much bigger and so much blown up and in your face. The books, the cover, it's a beautiful thing to be able to have on display and be able to look at and, you know, be like, you know, somebody walks by and, you know, as opposed to, you know, possibly like a tabletop book or something, you know, it's something to have on display and, you know, it catches your eye. And both books are very, very well done. So absolutely props for the design on both of these.
Yeah, that part is huge, and definitely, like, I mean, we didn't get so much into Blood on Black Wax, but that was originally, like, Jeff had the original idea because Jeff is a big horror soundtrack guy. He wanted to write a book on horror soundtracks, and we went back and forth for what seemed like an endless amount of time, coming up with the concept, for the project. And what we ended up sort of landing on was, let's do an album cover book, like the whole record album cover books from the 60s and 70s, where it was all, you know, the biggest rock bands or whatever in the 70s. And it was basically, you know, 70% record album, 30% text. And we kind of said, let's do that for horror soundtracks. That'll be fucking cool. Because let's face it, a lot of people that buy these things are buying them for art pieces, right? I'm sure that's big for you too. And you want to have them on display. You know, it's not just something you pull out and put on. If that's all you cared about, you would just download it, kind of thing. You know what I mean? But you want to own that piece of art, and it's a big part. Like having the right artwork for a record does. You know, some people will say, well, what difference is, you know, it doesn't change the sound. It changes the atmosphere of it. You know what I mean? And I look at a band like, say, like Black Sabbath, right? If Black Sabbath was called something else, if Black Sabbath had kept their name as Earth, no one would care about them to this day. They wouldn't. Black Sabbath, it would be like, yeah, Earth band, they were pretty cool. But it's the name Black Sabbath just creates visual images in your head while you listen to it. And the album covers for Black Sabbath, especially the first one, it tells you this is what you're supposed to be kind of visualizing and sort of feeling while you're listening to this music. And I think the same with the reissues, you know, of soundtracks. And some are better than others, right? I mean, we all have our favorites and some that we think, I don't know why they went with that artwork, kind of thing. But it's a big critical choice when you're reissuing a soundtrack.
Sure. You know, as far as with display too, you know, it was one of those things, because I know that you have been somewhat involved in like the hardcore and heavy music community. There was a phase there for a little while too, where even bands didn't want to have artwork for the sake of, you know, conforming to everything else that was going on. And I was really glad that didn't, you know, that whole trend didn't stick around, just because, you know, I think it just adds one more element to loving an album.
Yeah, I think the thing with hardcore, because I was a big hardcore kid in like the late 90s and early 2000s and stuff like that, is that it was very much about, like, hardcore got really, really heavy to the point where people were sort of like, well, what's the difference between this and metal? And what the difference was, hardcore is supposed to be kind of down here, street level, talking about real struggles in life, and heavy metal was like these fucking people coming up with. So it was sort of cool to be as basic as possible, stripped down as possible, and that went down to the artwork, especially with, like, when you think about t-shirt designs. I remember, you know, 80s metal t-shirt designs were just like as much graphic as you could possibly get on the t-shirt. I remember, like, so badly. I used to sneak when my brother went off to high school. I would put on his, like, you know, Ride the Lightning 3/4 length t-shirt and wear it to school because it's badass.
Right.
But then that became completely lame in the late 90s, and it was all about having just a black t-shirt with a name on it. And I thought, no, that's cool. And I'm kind of happy that went away, to be honest, because it's boring. You end up with, like, a t-shirt. Every t-shirt looks the same, kind of thing.
There's you know, it's a visual thing. You know, I've always been one of those people, even with movie, you know, covers, you know, as far as I understand from the sales aspect, but I always appreciate if a movie has a drawn cover or a painted cover or some sort of image that somebody came up with and, you know, took the time to present to somebody. You know, most recently, like if you've seen Color Out of Space, that's a newer movie that they did that and had multiple different covers. And they had, you know, Nicolas Cage on it, but it was more about the whole movie and the visuals of it. You know, that's always been a huge selling point to me.
And that's why, for me, like Italian horror is really, because I'm very into aesthetic. And when I was younger, I actually didn't like Italian horror films because I'm like, doesn't fucking make any sense. I can't like a movie that doesn't
same.
make sense. And now I don't care. You know, I don't care that it didn't make any sense because I just like the colors of it and obviously music, right? Like the Italian horror part of Blood and Black Wax, that was sort of the chapter that I felt most passionate about because I just really, really wanted to talk about that and the amount of like intricate detail that went into creating soundtracks that were completely not what you think of a movie soundtrack sounding like.
Sure.
That absolutely contribute to the aesthetic and the atmosphere and the art of what that movie is. You know what I mean? And it's to me one of the most like fascinating subgenres with horror. But nowadays, I was always more of a substance over style. I'm sort of more style over substance these days.
Okay.
Because they've told every story to tell, you know what I mean? So I'm more into the art of it now, I guess.
So now for our finale question. All right, we've wrapped up. We've gone into some really cool stuff. We've talked about your new book here. Before we get into your partner in crime, Jeff, I have one final question for you, and it's a little bit out there. You can take a minute if you have to think about it, you know. But so if you were to take any sci-fi or horror movie, either or. It sounds like you're a little bit more passionate about horror, so we'll even go with horror. If you were to take any horror movie and you were to replace the score in it with any band's music, what movie would it be, and with what band's music?
You know, that's pretty out there. 'Cause of course, well, there's some really good examples of that. Like you think about Legend, right? And Legend had the Jerry Goldsmith score and it had the Tangerine Dream score. And I think people are really, it's very binary. Like people are either, no, definitely Jerry Goldsmith. I was about to say Jerry Goldsmith, or they're definitely Tangerine Dream, right? So I think that what I would probably do, yeah, that's a really good question. I can't think of a particular film, but I think that what I would like is to take a movie, like if you think about the zombie, this is kind of hardcore for the horror fans, but you know there's like Zombie and Zombie 2 and Zombie 3 and Zombie 4. Zombie 4, which is a film that everyone hates, has the soundtrack and it's fucking incredible, and it's everywhere in the film. It's constantly playing kind of thing, right? So I would like to take a film like, say, let's take, say, and I'm going to come up with probably a different answer at 4 a.m. when I start to think about this, but if you take a film like, say, okay, here's something totally random, Intruder. Have you guys ever seen the slasher film?
Oh, yeah.
Love that film. You know, I just love this store. Take that and just have a huge pulsing electronic soundtrack by Tangerine Dream. How's that for totally random?
Dude, that's sick. When I was thinking of the question, it was more of a thing with you being involved in the music community and thinking something like Maximum Overdrive with having like AC/DC or something like that. But that's a better answer than I could have ever asked for,
Well,
and probably that I would have come up with.
I think the thing is that a lot of times, theme songs and stuff like that. It's a lot of bands. I think there's very few examples where like a rock band or something like that contributed a really good score. I think it's more. I think people want to do that. Like they want to put. I was watching this really lo-fi horror film called Darkness. It came out in the early 90s. It's a total fucking gore film. It's actually pretty cool, but they use a lot of metal in it, and once the metal starts playing, it takes you a little bit out of the film. Not because I don't like metal, but just because it doesn't really fit with the atmosphere of the film, sort of thing. Like it's like, okay, but that's a band that's playing. It's not something sort of more ethereal playing in the background.
Oh, okay. Got you. Okay. And another one too that was more recent. Have you ever seen Bliss?
Yeah, I did watch.
Joe,
I did watch Steve Moore, right?
Joe Begos directed it. I'm sorry. You were talking about the score, probably.
Yeah, it was Steve Moore from Zombie, the band Zombie. Okay. Steve was great. He's done a lot of good stuff. he sent me a few years ago. I did this sort of compilation soundtrack for Rue Morgue, and it was all the different horror synth artists, because that sort of was something that was coming out that I was a big fan of. And what did he gave me something? It was an unused score that he wrote. Damn, I can't remember it now. He gave me music that he wrote for a score that wasn't used, and now it's going to bug me what the hell it was.
Ooh.
Anyhow, he's a good guy, and definitely I think his music is great. Like, I mean, there's a lot of different movies like Cub, the soundtrack for Cub, that's great.
Okay.
The Mind's Eye, he did that one as well. So shout out to more.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, this is going to wrap up your half of the interview. If you want to plug anything, or if you want to say anything for the last part, I truly appreciate you being on and taking the time with me, man.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I got nothing to plug other than this book, Planet Wax, and
Beautiful.
Mars. But I guess what I would say is I would just say, and I kind of said it on Instagram, but for those of you that don't follow me, Jeff and I, we wrote Planet Wax under a much shorter deadline than Bottom Black Wax, and it was this big rush, and he and Jeff and Matt were sort of rushing to get it done. And I mean, we really got it. Like, we got that vinyl done right under the wire. We had no idea what was going to happen to the world in 2020. Obviously, we didn't see that coming. We were just pumped for Record Store Day, and then all of this started happening. Oh crap! And then we're like, oh, Record Store Day got canceled as well, and now America is basically burning down to the ground. Like, we're releasing the book at just the most bizarre time when you compare to where we are now to where we were last year. And for me, anyone that shows any interest or any love or any buys the book or even just shows interest in it, I just appreciate them so much that they're even considering thinking about this book at a time when, quite frankly, there's a lot of bigger problems in the world. So a lot of love for the horror and sci-fi community from Hamilton, Ontario, and myself.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you very much, buddy. I truly appreciate it. I'll give you a socially distant elbow bump there. And you take care, man. We will talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, dude. And
thank you for being on.
Say hi to Jeff.
Yeah. All right. So now we were getting into this is the second half of the interview, Mr. Jeff Szpirglas. I really appreciate you being on the show today. If you can, let's just start out with what was your sci-fi origin when you were coming up? Where did your love for the genre come from?
I was a big sci-fi guy, and I think as Eric alluded to, I was not allowed to watch a lot of horror. I mean, that kind of shifted when I hit grade 6 and discovered them in a big way. I was also scared of them, but scared and curious. I was talking to somebody about scary books for kids. There was a video store that existed in Ontario called Jumbo Video. And, there was a horror section, like many people have, like you have with your horror cave, where it was literally, there was the open video store and like a dungeon, like with faux, rocks, and you could go into the was very dimly lit, and they had torches, and they had art. Sci-fi never got a section like that, but horror did, and I think that just speaks to the pull it has. But I was a huge sci-fi fan. I mean, I still am. But Star Wars. Like, I'm a kid who was born in the 70s. Star Wars was it. I mean, you didn't get bigger than that. Although for me, Doctor Who is a really huge, huge passion of mine. It was a show that has a huge history. It's rebounded after, being off the air for some time. And it was just accessible to me through PBS and through public television in Canada. It was always on, and I think we kind of got it the Tom Baker years, where actually they were scary sci-fi stories that were kind of aimed at families, and yet sometimes it really pushed the envelope in terms of how scary it allowed itself to be. When ATV would have a free weekend, and we'd get a beta tape and I'd require a movie. And I remember that's how I, got exposed to things like The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, still one of my favorite titles for a movie. Or things like Krull.
Okay.
Love Krull, which is a weird sci-fi hybrid. So a lot of those movies that kind of came out in the 80s on the heels of Star Wars. I think Star Wars kind of showed everybody that there was big money to be had, and a lot of studios put big money into those movies. They put big money into the music too. If you listen to a lot of the soundtracks coming out of that era, like following on the heels of Star Wars, and John Williams' very romantic style take on what the soundtrack was. So many soundtracks tried to sound like that, but as John Williams said, like that music is an anachronism. It's not music of the future. It's a music from the past that we associated with those kinds of movies for quite some time. I mean, if you look before Star Wars, and a movie like, I got it right here, came with visuals like Logan's Run by Jerry Goldsmith. That's 76, the year before Star Wars. It doesn't sound remote Star Wars. It's what Jerry Goldsmith did a great job was with being really progressive in terms of the use of electronics, but also like very dissonant, atonal music, sometimes incorporating serialism. Like Planet of the Apes has like 12-tone row techniques that really make a very unsettling and jarring score. It's a world apart from Star Wars and those kinds of movies. So I came to those kinds of movies later on as a teenager when I was sort of exploring how deep the sci-fi rabbit hole went. But my first love was always that. Although Doctor Who really was also a very experimental show, certainly in terms of the theme song and how the music was realized electronically, like by Delia Derbyshire and Brian Hodgson, really were pushing the envelope in terms of what could be done with tape manipulation, with taking recorded sound and versing it and adding layers to it. Things that now we press a button on our computer and it's done. But there is something to be the analog technique that they really went through to make it sound unique. That sound, that Doctor Who theme holds up today. I mean, they sample it in the new show, be kind of good. I probably answered your question, but yeah.
No, right. Now, because your guys' first book primarily was based on horror, Blood on Black Wax, was it more of your inspiration and love for sci-fi and fantasy in the genre that made you really want to push Planet Wax being sci-fi and fantasy?
I love horror films. I love the music of horror films. I think the use of sound and music in a horror film often is what makes the movie so effective. I mean, what's interesting is that it was probably for me. I knew that I was really passionate about horror soundtracks. I mean, Aaron and I both specifically had such a broad knowledge of them. I mean, for me, it's funny. Our interests often overlap a little bit, and what I was really interested in were like the older horror scores, things from the old Hammer films. And Aaron really liked Italian soundtracks from like the 70s, which was, I mean, I knew I knew like the big ones, but I had to do a real deep dive on some of the more obscure ones. Like I didn't know about the band Libra, who did Shock, which is a great prog rocky Italian giallo film score. That was a new one for me. That was the fun of any nonfiction book I've done, written many nonfiction books, is I don't necessarily claim to be the expert, but I'm a really good learner, and I will throw myself into it. I mean, that's just what I do. But with the sci-fi one, I had a broader base knowledge. I watched so many of those movies as a kid. And Aaron spoke to, there was a chapter on children's sci-fi and family sci-fi. And I think just because I happened to grow up in a time where they were marketing those films for families and for people like me, they don't do that with horror. There are some horror family crossovers. The Witches is a good one. But many, probably because horror scares people. And, myself included to some degree, are sometimes conservative about what we want to put in front of our kids. I mean, although, listen, a lot of sci-fi movies deal with themes and concepts that are pretty mature. Great. A lot of the David Cronenberg's movies, like The Fly and Critters, we actually got to speak to David Newman about briefly. I mean, it had been such a long time since he'd looked at and thought about Critters. He had more to say about things like Galaxy Quest and about the Bill and Ted's movie. Uh-oh, I'm breaking up again. Breaking up is hard to do. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, boy, you're an author, a teacher, and a vocalist. I had no idea. Let's see here. So as far as we're talking about Critters, that was the last thing.
Yep. And David Newman.
David Newman. Yeah. So now, okay. So your new book came out. Another thing too, as you're also, as I mentioned, an author. So you also have children's books that you do too. Do you have a little bit of a different approach? Obviously, you can't be you can't be adulty with children's books. But do you have a different approach as far as your writing style between something like a Planet Wax as opposed to some of your younger viewers' books?
So this is a good question here. If I reach over and pull out books that I've done for people who may not know like the other things I do here. So all right, here we go. So like I'm plugging a lot of books. Get the new one that I'm actually plugging. I have like 3 books coming out this summer, which is very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Very challenging time books to have come out because you can't
Sure.
go into a book right now.
Right.
But I write as a children's horror anthology for middle grade readers. It's called Tales from the Fringes of Fear. It's a sequel to one that came out in the fall called Tales from Beyond the Brain, which, by the way, are 2 books that have amazing art. This stuff is by Stephen Hughes, and there's illustrations throughout. Fabulous job. I did like a choose-your-own style story that's like out last week from Scholastic Canada called Countdown to Danger, Canadian Survival. In both of the cases, they're books that are for kids, but I don't radically change my writing style. I write knowing that I write for me, first and foremost. But like just have stories have kids as protagonists. Probably, the writing is, there may be some vocabulary that I don't use because kids may not know what those words are. And also I may, like, certainly in the horror stories, I would rather pull back, and it's hard to say. Like, there's a line I think that you probably shouldn't cross. But when I'm doing a first draft, I go across the line, and then I look at it, and then I'll pull back later as I'm editing it, or as my editors will, make changes on my behalf that I can agree with or disagree with. But I would rather not worry about the line and then deal with that later, and just let the writing be the writing. The only time that doesn't happen is actually with books like these. And I've written a lot of these with my wife. This one I did solo. It's called Wild Cards. But these are books that are designed, they're designed for emerging readers. They're like the early chapter books that like in grade 2 might read independently. So in that case, I know that I actually have to be careful about the number of syllables in a word or the length of a sentence. So not having too many compound sentences. So really, like, it's very terse writing. But the story still needs to be a realistic story for kids. A teacher in my day job, a teacher for grade 2 for 7 years. So I know what a grade 2 classroom looks like, and I know what the world of the school looks like. I know we're sort of skewing for soundtracks, but I guess the long answer is that most of the time I'm just writing, and I'm trying to follow where, my interests take me. And the soundtrack books we had to pull back too. I mean, especially when we were writing long, and I was writing a lot about a certain. I know I had to like cut it down to 300 words, or if an interview ran long. Sure. But we didn't have the visuals to go with it. It was a little like a knife in my heart, where we had to cut back to not have the full view. Right. I think, for example, I was really fighting for. It was Craig Saffin's music for The Last Starfighter. It was a huge score for me as a kid. Great music, and it was a really good interview. And we used some really good quotes. There's some things that didn't make the book that I would love to have seen the light of day. For example, story that it was more of a confirmation, but I heard from him in an interview somewhere else that he came up for the theme for The Last Starfighter in the car, because people in Los Angeles are perpetually driving on the road. He's like, it's true, but he said it wasn't the main theme. It wasn't. I can hum it for you. Which actually I second orchestrator for with Alf Clausen, The Simpsons. But it was actually there's a part that goes da 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 da, which that was what he came up with in the car. But what I didn't understand and didn't realize that actually is one of those. It says the movie, The Last Starfighter. I didn't realize that was.
Oh, no kidding.
There's a bunch of scores that do that. Superman does that, right?
Sure.
Like Richard Donner.
Yeah, sure.
And the book talks about how Superman, like he said, like the blew his mind. And James Bernard did that all the time with Dracula and Quatermass and Frankenstein. Like he would just have the theme be a musical way of saying the music. Saying the word musically through music.
Okay.
These musical.
That's awesome. Okay. And I ask about, because obviously there's not going to be huge differences, but I like to hear the roots as far as, your writing process and your thought behind, just the thoughts with, where you start with something and where, you kind of pull back, like you mentioned. So you did have really cool key points, and a lot of behind the scenes stuff that's cool. And the interview that we did the other day too, with you showing us the mapping and everything, I was really stoked. I showed my wife right away and I'm like, yeah, look at this. This is so cool. Like the multiple ending books. And actually I went and I bought 3 of your books. I bought Fear This Book. Yeah, of course. You have to support. Fear This Book, Countdown to Danger with a bear on the cover. I can't think of what it was. Canadian Adventure, maybe?
This Canadian Survival.
Boom. There it is, man. That one. And then I ended up buying the sequel to Tales from with the wolf on it.
Oh, the wolf. That's the new one. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Awesome. So
people actually buy the books. I mean, it's not my day job, but it certainly, do we do this for the money? Yeah, everyone does something for money. But I mean, if my primary goal was to make money, I wouldn't be writing books.
Relying on it, right?
Yeah, but I do it because I love doing it. I've always done it since I was young. And
it's awesome.
Writing, whether or not we can make book on it. So.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, with Aaron, I've supported it for the longest, being a fan with Rue Morgue, and then, it's really cool, and a love of this show is being able to discover a lot more about different people, interviewing them, and looking, into research, and then finding out that you were an author as well, checking out your books. I bought a few of those. So now, when you guys finalized on that you were going to be doing a sci-fi feature, what were some of the go-tos that you were excited and wanted to write about?
So there was obviously, one of the things that Blood on Black Wax had that this book doesn't have, and I think probably with good reason, is we went far back with Blood on Black Wax. So things like music from Universal horror films, like The Bride of Frankenstein, huge score. Or the Hammer music. I mean, that stuff is from the 50s and before that. And I know that at one point it was, we were kind of, said that we were going to focus on like 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, we put a hard cut at 99, which means that The Matrix we could talk about, but not Harry Potter or not Lord of the Rings. Like we didn't go, and Blood on Black Wax go up to like a movie like Hereditary or Get Out. I think that suddenly the book becomes dated. If it's still on store shelves 15 years from now, and we're lucky that it's there, more movies will have come out with amazing scores. So I think with this book, we tried to define, I think it's called classic sci-fi fantasy soundtracks on vinyl. But we really focused on 70s, 80s, 90s. 90s are an interesting decade because CDs had kind of taken over, and there are a lot of great things. I actually found a few. There's some soundtracks that, like, big ones I'm a huge fan of, like Metal Storm is from '83. It's not. And this is the Richard Band's copy. Is love that. Things like Brazil. I don't think that there's an LP release of that. That's a and the book is. Or I remember 20th Century Fox put out The Day the Earth Is Still. I mean, this is.
Oh yeah, sweet.
Soundtracks in sci-fi, but
right.
Its availability on vinyl is kind of limited. It pops up on some compilations, but also it goes further back than perhaps I think that we wanted to kind of focus on. So our lens really was 70s and 80s with a bit of 90s. We do dip back in the 60s because there's a TV chapter, and there are so many like huge sci-fi franchises from the 60s, like Doctor Who, like Star Trek, The Twilight Zone, even Batman, and like the Jerry Anderson TV shows, like the ones with the Super Marionation puppets. So there's a real rich history of 60s and 50s sci television, and we did have a TV chapter in Blood on Black Wax. We talked about that because there are some notable things like Dark Shadows, for example. Right. But sci-fi is such a huge slice of it is of the TV age, especially in early days. You would get a lot of things like Lost in Space and these big, huge franchises. To not include them, I would have felt like a bit of a hole in the book, like something was missing. So I was glad that we could put that in the book. And certainly, sure. Star Wars movies are there. My other go-tos are things like the Spaceballs soundtrack or, Krull. I love Krull. I mean, there's a lot of Aaron will joke about how much I love Krull, but I love the music for Krull. It's like James Horner, is one of those two of the three who's dead. Would just write. Sometimes, if you listen to his music, it sounds like he's just using the same variations on the same score over and over again. But in a movie like Krull, I think it's like it is the first expression of his musical voice. I mean, maybe the Star Trek movies that he did as well, but I mean, it was big in my heart to put Krull into the book, or even this one. Who doesn't love Lady Hawk? Well, a lot of people love Lady Hawk. It's Andrew Powell from Alan Parsons' project. I think one thing in our Richard Donner interview that didn't make it into the book, but he was saying we were driving around looking at locations and castles, and they were listening to Alan Parsons' project. I remember Richard Donner said that should be the sound of the movie, which a lot of fans were upset about because the sound of fantasy films in the 80s was big symphonics. And although there are a lot of big symphonic pieces in that score, what people remember is like this very mid 80s ELO kind of pop sound that I think has divided listeners. But I really liked it, and as I think Andrew Powell said in interviews, like it's not to do that big romantic sound would have also been anachronistic. It's of a later era, and we're looking at like this medieval feudal society. So does it matter that you have a pop score or that you have a big symphonic score? I mean, the music is going to be the music for the film. I mean, the good thing about Lady Hawk is that it's got a great theme, and it works well in like a pop idiom. It works well in like a orchestral idiom. It sounds good both ways. I mean, some of the fight stuff kind of sounds different than what you might expect from 1985, but then Matthew Broderick is the comic relief, and I think when you look at him in that movie, he was in Ferris Bueller's the next year, and so it's hard for me to disassociate it being a bit of a weird mashup of like teen movie with pop soundtrack and like old love story with Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer. It's I have a lot to say about Lady Hawk. It's I could have gone on longer than our 300 words. Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. Everybody has their passions, man. You can't be embarrassed by it. You gotta love what you gotta love. So now, if somebody goes online and they type in www.jeffspirglas.com, they're gonna find a bio there, and in that bio, it says that you're a teacher and an author by day and a superhero by night. So, if I were to ask you, you could be in any Hammer film that any Hammer film that you could choose. Any Hammer film that you choose with any superhero power. What movie and what power would you have?
Oh my goodness! I know, man. Aaron questions. I was like, oh, okay. Now I have extra time to answer the Aaron questions. See, I was going to plug, Tupperware Remix Party for Sci-Fi Fan, but now I have a different question. Oh, yeah, like, shaking things up. So I have to be in a Hammer film, right?
Correct.
My favorite Hammer film is Quatermass in the Pit. But is that the Hammer film I want to be in? There's a lot you could, be in, like Empire Circus. They got pretty interesting as the 70s. Let's put me in. You can put me in The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, and because I think that there's so many vampires and there's a lot of kung fu. I'm not a big fan of that movie, but I would be in that movie to be a superhero, and I would just have amazing kung fu fighting powers.
You'd make the movie better.
The athletic ability to do what the Shaw brothers do, and to have that athletic ability to be my superpower.
Beautiful. Yeah, you'd make the movie better. Jeff Szpirglas in the leading role.
Yeah.
We'll make it happen. All right, so now for your finale, we have pushed through it, man. We have made through. I'm gonna have to go through and do a little bit of editing, but we're gonna make it look better. Okay, I promise you. I'm not gonna have you looking like a turd on YouTube.
Podcast.
All right, here we go. There we are. All right, so now for the
What do you
big
guys think?
finale,
Tell me.
for the big ending, if you could write any choose-your-own ending book based on a sci-fi or horror movie that is not Phantom of the Paradise,
Okay.
what book would you read? I know you love Phantom of the Paradise, but I had to pick your brain a little bit.
Sure. So I'm doing a choose your own style story with any sci-fi. I think we were talking about this the other day, I would do a time travel movie because I think that the possibilities of choosing your own path in a sci-fi trapping that goes back in time, I think would be so much fun to do. So, but would I want to do like a Back to the Future? Or would I want to do something like Crimes? I'm skewing towards time. Yeah. Or something like, as we were also talking about Happy Death Day to You Too, which I think is like scenario after scenario, somebody stuck in the wheels of a machine that keeps chewing them up and spitting them out through time. I think that would be a lot of fun. I actually have tried, there's a concept I've been playing with in which I'm doing just that. Decide, is it going to be its own linear narrative with time travel paradoxes, or should it actually just as a choose-your-own style story with time travel paradoxes? I can't decide which actually would be more interesting, but for the purposes of the question, let's go with option B.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, that is awesome, man. This is your time. If you want to plug anything, if you want to give a shout out to anybody, this is us wrapping it up, dude.
Oh my goodness. Well, I will echo Aaron's sentiment to anyone who goes and picks up a book. Thank you just for supporting us in the book. And I value that there it is there. Look, virtually I've got one right here. I mean, there I can crack open with that thing. Yeah, you like open up a page. Oh, there's coma and wavelength.
Coma.
I mean, if you. I value these movies. They're really important to me. If you like these movies and these soundtracks, I think you'll really enjoy it. I mean, sure, am I going to plug all my new books? Yeah, you can find them on my website, jeffspirglas.com. Each of these I had, sometimes I've worked on projects where, I got a contract and I'm writing a book for somebody. And I always find something that I love about a project. I can't do a project where I don't have a degree of love for it. In each of these, they do speak to parts of me that, I would be writing them if I didn't have a contract to write them. These are the kinds of things I would do independently. And so, you kind of love them, not exactly like children, because I obviously love my children more, but I love them as one loves their own book. And big shout out to my wife, Danielle Jones, who, we've written books together, but finding the balance in one life to do being a dad and being a teacher and being a writer and being able to manage that and to give me the space to work on these projects, and her encouragement, feedback, that's a big deal. She's she's a huge part of my life. What can I say? And I tip my proverbial hat to her. She's awesome. While the interview was happening, she brought me this amazing Starbucks. What is it? Green crunch. I don't know what that is, but anyhow, I'm going to enjoy this.
Well, beautiful. That is so nice.
Oh, vibes and others. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, I truly appreciate you guys, man. Hopefully, I'll get you. I'm sure I'm going to get you back on here because it's been a real treat talking to you the couple times I have. I love Aaron's stuff. Your guys' books, I will forever appreciate and will forever, be buying into and forking over my money. So, and I'm going to be getting your books here pretty soon as well. So,
Amazing. Wait, I got one more shout out. Guys,
sure.
you also have to support Rue Morgue magazine. Aaron and I work for if you like Rue Morgue magazine, I know that it's a tough time out there in the magazine world, especially the physical printed magazine world. So any love that you can give for, Rue Morgue is, had a part to play in Blood on Black Wax. All right, it's all good.
I'm not going to end off on you just being a frozen face, Jeff. I can't do that to you. That's a face I can take. All right, buddy. Well, this has been our interview. Thank you so much. Go and support Planet Wax. This is your boy, the Lo-Fi Horror Guy. Take care, and a virtual elbow bump for social distancing.
He's a lo-fi horror guy. Yeah, he's kind of a guy, but he is so lo-fi, a horror guy. Yeah.